Welcome to the Bad Word with David Shelton. I am your host, Kanye West, and this is the greatest show of all time. Now, here are tonight's top stories. First thing is first, the Democratic presidential debate. God, was that boring. It was so difficult to watch. Like it didn't have the zip of the Republican debate. The only zinger was Hillary basically just doing a bye Felicia to the guy standing next to her. There was no low blows, there was no racism, no sexism, no homophobia. There were only two candidates. Wait, hold on. Yeah. What do you mean there were 5 candidates? There was Bernie Sanders there was just Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. So those other 3 guys were candidates. Has anyone told them that they have no chance in hell of winning this? Fine, I'll bring them up. Okay, there were 5 candidates. There was Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, and basically three Michelles from Destiny's Child. Now, what was really different about this debate is just the feel of it and really the issues. The issues weren't as skewed as they were in the GOP debate. In the GOP debate, it was, what are you going to do to repeal Obamacare, tightening the borders with immigration, religious freedom, and how much of a hoax climate change is. And the Dem debate didn't really go into that. It didn't go that direction. The Democratic debate was, they weren't partisan topics. Well, depending on how you look at them, they weren't partisan topics. They talked about minimum wage increases, universal health care, free and reduced college, student loan debt, how climate change actually is a problem. And of course, maybe the only partisan issue is gun control. Now, what I look at here, there's the difference with these issues was mostly their political importance. It seems like in the Democratic debate, you had real issues that affected a lot of different people. And in the GOP debate, it seemed like everything was skewed. All the questions, they were skewed to just feed into that real fringe part of the base. And I feel like the Democratic debate, the issues that they talked about, they were issues that can bring the majority of us up without keeping people down. Now, I should make it clear, I'm not a Democrat. Contrary to popular belief, I really am not a Democrat. Personally, I feel like Democrats and Republicans, they're just 2 sides of the same coin, to be honest. But the one difference that I notice with the Republicans and the Democrats is the sincerity. And Democrats, at least they fake like they care about everyone. They probably don't. But at least they act like they do. And Republicans are just straight up assholes. It seems like whenever a politician says something racist or sexist or homophobic, it's usually a Republican, and it's hardly ever a Democrat. I mean, at least not on purpose. No, that's just my opinion. However, dick pics and sex scandals, that's a free-for-all. Now, moving on to Croatia, the other place where mail order brides come from. Now, Croatia made big news in the headlines this past week, and when it opened its borders to between 2,000 and 3,000 Syrian refugees in the wake of all the turmoil and the just hell and unrest in Syria. Now, this came after refugees waited outside for 2 days in rain and mud and really just awful conditions. Now, the move to open the borders was in response to Turkey attempting to tighten its borders because they feel like they've gotten too many immigrants already. Turkish officials say that they don't want Turkey to become, quote, a concentration camp. And to that, I say good, because in a European context, a concentration camp is never a good thing. Just saying. Now, in all seriousness, though, this situation, this quagmire, whatever you want to call it, is really fucking sad. Like, this crisis going on in Syria is terrible, and like what's happening to these people in their country, it's not their fault at all. I mean, now, if the prevailing opinion at Fox News is that this immigration is all just a plot by ISIS to send its people to Western countries, including America, and overthrow their governments. But here in good old reality, we all know that's not the case. See, all these people want is economic freedom, stability, and fairness, and really just to not live in a goddamn war zone. Now, I feel like if the Turks or the Americans or the Brits or the French were going through a similar crisis, they would want neighboring countries to come to their aid. And I doubt that the burden that they're placing on these countries would really cross their mind when their houses are getting blown up or their kids are dying. I mean, and the thing is that what's weird about all of this is that as people can, shit on this mass migration, it's kind of weird coming from certain people, especially Americans. Americans, they seem to forget that all of our ancestors were immigrants at one point in time. And, most of them came here for the same thing, a better life, more opportunity, and more equality. Now, granted, other people's ancestors came here for a different reason that I'm not bitter about at all. But the difference between Syrian immigrants and even Mexican immigrants and the immigrants that came to this land, 500 or so years ago, is that the fear of immigrants coming to your country and destroying your culture, like today, that fear is just xenophobic hysteria masquerading as patriotism. For the Native Americans who lived here all those years ago, that was their reality. Now, moving on to our main story, minimum wage. More money than I get paid to do this show. Now, minimum wage has been a hot topic in America for, a while now. And a lot of Americans support a minimum wage increase. Actually, 6 in 10. And a lot of politicians seem to agree. Hillary Clinton supports a minimum wage increase. Obviously, so does Bernie Sanders. Elizabeth Warren, the Obama administration supports a minimum wage increase. And even Ben Carson and Chris Christie have come around on increasing the minimum wage. Marco Rubio's on the record saying that Americans can't live on $11 an hour. I mean, that didn't stop him from voting against a bill to increase the minimum wage from $10.10 an hour. But hey, this is America. Words speak way louder than actions. Now, Carly Fiorina and Jeb Bush, two Republican presidential candidates, I might add, feel that the minimum wage should be left up to the states. And that it's actually a fair point. I can understand why they would say that. They're wrong, but I can understand why they would say that. And it's going to take a recently graduated and political science major who is in debt up to his fucking nose to tell them why they are wrong. Now, we have 4 states in this country as of 2014 that have a minimum wage lower than the national minimum of $7.25 an hour. Those states are Arkansas, minimum wage $6.25 as of 2007. Georgia, $5.15 as of 2002. Minnesota has a two-tier system where larger companies pay $6.15 an hour and smaller ones pay $5.25 an hour. They've had that since 2006. Wyoming has had $5.15 for all three of its people since 2002. And then there are another 5 states that have, well, no state minimum wage at all. Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, South Carolina, and Tennessee. All states that belong to the Bible Belt, aka the place where no one forgot God, but God forgot them. Now, there's also someone else who weighed in on minimum wage. Product of a failed attempt at cloning a yam, Donald Trump has a very different opinion on what we should do about minimum wage. In an interview with Chuck Todd, he said that he would keep minimum wage where it is right now. But later on in a phone interview with Joe Scarborough, he said that he thinks that America was at its best when wages were lower, because of course he does. He essentially said that if wages are too high, it makes the United States less competitive in the job market or compared to other nations. And he also said that if the cost of hiring people is too high, corporations will take their business to other countries. And, well, okay, fine. If we just go by that logic, let's just get rid of child labor laws and 40-hour work weeks so we can have a job market that mirrors the ones of Mexico and China. You know, the place where Donald Trump makes his shitty fucking ties. Sorry. All this talking about Donald Trump is just fucking with me right now. Now, the minimum wage, there are a lot of reservations against raising the minimum wage. Now, according to the Department of Labor, some of those concerns include, but are not limited to, raising the minimum wage will mostly only benefit teens. It'll cause job loss, or it'll negatively impact small businesses. One of the concerns is that minimum wage increases automatically, so there's no point in making legislation concerning it. Of course, all of this is bullshit. First, 89% of minimum wage workers are over the age of 20. 56% of those are women. So this isn't just an issue for anyone who majored in the humanities, it's also a feminist issue. Go fucking figure. In a letter to President Obama, 600 economists, 7 of which were Nobel Prize winners, said, quote, increases in the minimum wage have had little or no negative effect on the employment of minimum wage workers, even during the times of weakness in the labor market. Third, a July 2015 survey found out that 3 out of 5 small business owners with employees support a gradual increase in the minimum wage to $12 an hour. 4, we need congressional and executive approval to increase minimum wage, and we don't have that right now. Now, there's really no excuse for why we don't have a higher minimum wage in this country. However, there is a reason for it. That reason is lobbying. In March of 2014, 20 trade organizations wrote a letter to Congress saying, quote, raising the minimum wage will be detrimental to job creation and low-skilled workers trying to get started on the economic ladder. What else? Oh, people running for Congress received $5.5 million in campaign contributions over the 2010 and 2012 election cycles. Also, the groups just so happened to have spent $91 million on lobbying in the year 2013 alone. Honestly, if they would have just spent that money on, giving people a decent wage, we could have solved a lot of people's fucking problems already. Now, most of us can agree, for once, that the minimum wage in the United States should be higher. what's a little more difficult to agree on is just how high it should be. Now, some people say it should be $9 an hour. Others, as well as Bernie Sanders, hashtag feel the burn, hashtag Bernie Sanders 2016. We love you, Bernie. Now, Bernie Sanders has endorsed a $12 an hour minimum wage. Earlier this year, President Obama endorsed a $10.10 minimum wage. And in July, the House and the Senate introduced a bill that would make minimum wage $15 an hour. But in order to really figure out where we should be with minimum wage, I feel like we should start back to when the minimum wage was at its peak. In 1968, when we had a minimum wage of, drum roll, $1.60 an hour. That's small, thinking about it today, but when we calculate that in 2012 dollars, that's about $10.55 an hour, which that's even more than our president offered to raise it. Now, it sounds like a decent number, but you have to remember things didn't cost as much back then as they do today. And that's why that figure just so happened to work back then. Now, today is different. College and textbook costs are out of control. And we have a lot of technology that we have to keep up with. Cars and gas cost way more. And plus we have a market economy, which means that we have to buy a lot of useless shit that we don't need. Like emoji masks, watches with ants in them, a dick belt. I'm not sure if it's based on Justin Bieber's penis or not, but it is a thing. And of course, you have to get a bald eagle mask with included talons. Hashtag fucking America. Now, if our minimum wage kept pace with inflation, and with what minimum wage was in 1968, our minimum wage today would be a little over $21 an hour. But considering that things like prescription drug prices have increased twice as much as inflation, college tuition has increased as much as 9.5% higher than inflation, and if you remember our show from a few weeks ago, college textbooks are increasing even higher than that. Like, that's ridiculous. Like, $21 an hour would be nice, but that's increasing at the same rate of inflation. And yet, we're here fighting over whether it should be $9 or $12 or $15 an hour. Now, talking about increasing the minimum wage is nice. And we can talk about the benefits and everything that's wrong with it. We can argue about that all day, but it really doesn't matter unless we put it into practice. Oh wait, someone did put that into practice. The CEO, Dan Price of Gravity Payments, actually cut his own salary by 90% in order to pay all of his employees a minimum salary of $70,000 a year. A lot of shit came with that. Some of it good, some of it bad. Now, unfortunately, the company did lose some business because customers expected the company's services to increase, and some customers felt that the minimum wage or the wage increase was just a political statement. But even though they lost business, they're still in business. And while they lost some clients, they eventually added more, and they added so many more that it led to them hiring more people. And another bad thing that came with this was they lost two of their more important employees because they felt that the receptionist getting a raise while they didn't was unfair. And you can understand why they would say that. But this highlights a really big problem in America. And that problem is jealousy. More higher skilled workers feel that people in the food service industry shouldn't have higher wages. And on one hand, you can see that, but this also highlights two things. One is a crab mentality. We feel that in America, in order for some people to get ahead, others have to fail. It's kind of like cock blocking, but with money. And that idea is a little harder to scoff at when you realize that the wages overall in this country are at an all-time low. And it's not just the minimum. And what's sad is that wages are pretty low. They're lower, I'm pretty sure, than they've ever been before. Conversely, however, corporate profits are at an all-time high. So we don't just need minimum wage increases, we need wage hikes across the board. Now, in 1938, a politician said this: "Do not let any calamity howling executive with an income of $1,000 a day tell you that a wage of $11 a week is going to have a disastrous effect on all American industry." Now, while he was probably there watching the speech, that was not Bernie Sanders who said that. It was President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And like I said, 1938 is when he said that, and it's still relevant today. Now, if you ask me, just because the wage is at a minimum doesn't mean that the fairness and respect should be at a minimum as well. All right, that is our show for the night. Thank you to no one who showed up for the audience, but hey, it was fun. I had a great time. Thank you to whoever watches this. And we got one more week before we go on a little bit of a break because I am fucking exhausted. Yeah, that's it. This has been the Bad Word. Thank you and good night.